You know that sound a server makes right before it fails, not the loud alarms, but the subtle pitch change, like a breath being held too long. That's how my morning started at Northwell Dynamics. Most people hear background noise. I hear warnings. My name is Valeria Stone. I'm 57 years old. I've spent nearly 3 decades keeping systems alive that management forgot they depended on. The kind of systems nobody understands anymore, except the person they call legacy. It was a Tuesday. Tuesdays in our data center smelled like cold air, dust, and burnt circuitry. I was standing by rack 7, adjusting a timing parameter by instinct, not by chart. The monitoring dashboard said everything was fine. The floor vibration said otherwise. Experience always speaks quieter than arrogance. That's when I felt him behind me. Not the steady steps of an engineer, the fast, confident clicks of expensive shoes worn by someone who'd never crawled under a raised floor. Valeria Stone, he asked. I didn't turn around. You're inside a restricted maintenance zone, I said calmly. Unless you're certified. You're about 5 seconds from violating company policy. He laughed. The kind of laugh that assumes authority makes rules optional. I'm Derek Holt, Director of Operational Optimization, he said, holding up a tablet like it made him untouchable. Corporate sent me to modernize things. Modernize. The word tasted metallic. Systems architect, I corrected, finally facing him. And you must be the person here to explain why experience is suddenly inefficient. He smiled. Too polished. I've reviewed the metrics, he said. You spend an unusual amount of time on manual intervention. That tells me the system relies too much on you. That was when I knew. This wasn't a conversation. It was a decision already made. We're moving to a fully automated platform, Derek continued. Cloud managed. No more. Legacy dependencies. Legacy. As if survival were a flaw. We'll discuss your transition after the leadership meeting, he added, already turning away. Nothing personal, just progress. I watched him walk off, stepping carefully over cables he didn't recognize. I finished my adjustment. The servers stabilized instantly as I headed toward the conference room. I stopped by my locker. Hidden behind old manuals was a small encrypted drive, a backup of a backup, something I'd never needed until that moment. For the first time in years, I slipped it into my pocket. Something was about to break. Hope you're doing okay right now, really. If it's a little cold where you are, take a moment to grab a light blanket or jacket and keep your body warm. Small things like that quietly help more than we realize. Where are you listening from today? If stories like this resonate with you, stay with me and subscribe. There's more ahead. And what happened next at Northwell changed everything. The conference room at Northwell Dynamics was colder than the data center, and that was intentional. Cold rooms keep people alert, or so executives believe. I took a seat near the wall, notebook closed, hands folded. Around the table sat the familiar faces: compliance, finance, product, and 2 vice presidents who hadn't visited the server floor in years. Derek Holt stood at the front, tablet glowing like a stage light. He didn't sit, he paced. Over the last 90 days. He began. I've identified structural inefficiencies rooted in legacy dependence, single points of failure, manual overrides, tribal knowledge. His eyes slid to me, then away, like a magician acknowledging a prop. We're proposing a clean transition to a unified, cloud-managed control layer. Slides flicked past, charts rose, percentages smiled. I watched the room nod along to numbers that looked impressive because they were abstract. No one asked what happened when latency spiked. No one asked who resolved the outages they never saw. Valeria, Derek said, stopping. Your role has been invaluable historically, but in a modern environment, we can't anchor operations to individuals. It's a risk. A risk. I'd heard the word used for weather, for markets, for ideas, never for the people who quietly keep things alive. So we're standardizing, he continued. Automation replaces intervention, predictive systems replace intuition, and with that shift, certain positions become redundant. No gasp, no protest, Just the hum of HVAC and the soft click of a pen. I nodded once. Understood. Derek smiled. Relieved by my calm, HR will follow up after this meeting. The meeting ended with applause, the polite kind. Hands tapping the table like rain on glass. People filed out quickly, already late to the next obligation. A few avoided my eyes. One squeezed my shoulder as they passed. That was it. HR was waiting. Their office smelled like vanilla and toner. A young representative slid a document across the desk. 2 weeks per 5 years. A non-disparagement clause. A full handover of assets and access. Derek sat beside her, relaxed, confident. This isn't personal, he said again. It's evolution. I read the first page, then the second. The numbers were small. The language was clean. The assumptions were dangerous. You'll need to return keys, devices, and credentials today. HR added softly. I stood, unclipped my badge, and placed it on the desk. Then my keys, then my company phone. The clink of metal sounded final. That's everything, Derek said. I smiled. Of course. Security walked me out. The server floor hummed behind the glass as I passed. Unaware, outside. The parking lot was bright and ordinary. I sat in my car and didn't start it right away. Instead, I opened my personal tablet and checked a status page I'd built years earlier, quiet, invisible, and still very much alive. I didn't touch anything, not yet. I drove home in silence, that night. I slept longer than I had in months, somewhere across town. Derek Holt was probably celebrating progress. He thought he'd removed a dependency. What he'd actually done was remove the person who kept the map, and maps only matter once you're lost. The first sign didn't come with alarms or flashing red warnings. It came quietly, the way real failures always do. I was at home that morning, standing by the window with a cup of tea, watching the street wake up. Cars passed. A delivery truck idled. Everything looked normal. My tablet rested on the table behind me. Screen dim. Running a diagnostic mirror I hadn't officially accessed in years. Northwell Dynamics was still breathing. Systems like that don't collapse the moment you remove the person who understands them. They run on momentum, old safeguards, forgotten logic, decisions layered over decades. To executives, that looks like proof they were right. To someone like me, it looks like a countdown. Derek Holt had made it a point to arrive early. He wanted witnesses to progress. A clean launch, a symbolic break from the past. The legacy architect was gone. The future had a dashboard. The transition began smoothly, processes rerouted, controls handed off to the cloud layer, charts stayed green, smiles held. Then the rhythm shifted. Nothing dramatic, just a hesitation, a micro delay between instruction and response, too small to register on executive metrics, but large enough to matter in a tightly synchronized system. Automation doesn't question delays. It compensates. Motors pushed harder. Actuators corrected faster. Power draw climbed quietly. A safety routine attempted to step in an old one, written after a near miss that never made it into a quarterly report. The routine waited for confirmation. It didn't get it. Someone in IT suggested reverting to the local control loop. Derek declined. Reverting would mean admitting the past still mattered. He wasn't here to preserve. He was here to optimize. The system adapted again. That's when the first alignment slipped. A component seated itself where it shouldn't have. Not because it was broken, but because the timing that guided it was no longer precise. Another process tried to correct the mistake, relying on a calibration table that no longer existed, with no reference. The system guessed. Automation is excellent at many things. Guessing is not one of them. Metal struck metal at an angle that wasn't designed to exist. Sensors reacted too late. Emergency protocols tried to engage, but were slowed by the very efficiency improvements meant to replace them. The line locked. In the control room, voices rose. Hardware was blamed. Operators were blamed. Someone said the word glitch like it explained anything. Derek demanded a bypass. He needed momentum back, needed proof that this was temporary. The system warned him. He approved the override anyway. That decision cost him $55,000. Not all at once, not dramatically. It leaked away in penalties, damaged components, wasted materials, and contracts that punished delay without mercy. 9 minutes of confidence, unraveled by a system that no longer recognized the authority giving orders, when the breaker finally tripped. The silence that followed was heavy and expensive. Machines don't panic. They simply stop, and every second they remain still adds another number to the loss column. I watched the logs update from my living room. I didn't interfere. I didn't smile. This wasn't satisfaction, it was confirmation. A message appeared on my screen, an internal alert routed through an old pathway Derek didn't know existed. Then another. Then a third. People asking what happened. People asking if I'd seen it. I set the tablet face down. Some lessons don't need commentary. Northwell's systems hadn't failed because they were old. They failed because the person who understood why they worked was gone. Automation didn't replace judgment. It magnified the absence of it. Somewhere across town. Derek Holt was realizing that removing a dependency doesn't make you independent. It just reveals what you never learned to carry yourself. And the phone was about to ring. The phone rang once, then stopped. It rang again a few minutes later, longer this time. Like the caller hoped persistence might change reality. I let it go to voicemail, not out of spite, out of necessity. When systems fail, you don't rush toward the noise. You wait to hear what breaks next. By early afternoon, Northwell's internal chatter had reached a familiar pitch. Not panic, yet confusion. Confusion dressed up as urgency. Emails marked high priority, meetings scheduled and rescheduled, people looking for someone who could translate what the dashboards refused to explain. The third call came from a number I recognized. I answered. "Valeria?" Derek Holt said. Breathless. The confidence was gone. In its place was the brittle politeness of a man discovering that authority doesn't troubleshoot systems. We're experiencing instability. I didn't correct him. Our automation layer isn't behaving as expected. He continued. IT believes there may be residual dependencies, residual, like dust, like a stain you missed. I warned the team about removing local controls. He added quickly, already rewriting the morning. We may need your insight, temporarily. There it was, not an apology, a request framed as collaboration. I no longer work for Northwell. I said evenly. Yes. But you built, he stopped himself. This doesn't have to be adversarial. I looked at the tablet on my table, still face down. The system heartbeat had gone from green to amber, not catastrophic. Yet, what exactly do you want? Derek, I asked. A pause. Papers shuffling, someone whispering in the background. We need to understand why the safety routines didn't engage, he said. Why the override triggered such a costly failure. They did engage. I replied. They were blocked. That shouldn't be possible. Then you don't know the system. Another silence. Longer this time. Can you come in? He asked finally. I considered it. Not the way he expected. I considered the machines, the people on the floor who would take the blame if this spiraled, the technicians who would be told to work faster on systems that no longer trusted them. I can consult. I said. Off-site. Limited scope. Relief flooded his voice. That would be at my rate. I continued. And under my conditions. We can discuss no. I said gently. We can agree. Or we can hang up. He agreed. The conditions were simple. Read-only access restored to my diagnostic mirror. No overrides without written confirmation. And one more thing Derek didn't expect. I want the incident report. I said, unedited. He hesitated, then promised. After the call, I turned my tablet back over. The system logs were louder now, errors stacking, retries failing. Northwell was compensating again, pushing harder, trying to outrun its own blind spots. That's when I saw it. A secondary process one Derek's team didn't know existed was quietly preventing a cascade failure. It was an old safeguard, buried deep, triggered only when confidence exceeded competence. I'd written it after a different director. Years ago. Decided safety margins were optional. The system wasn't collapsing. It was holding itself together with habits Derek had already labeled obsolete. I drafted a short report. No blame, no emotion, just cause, effect, and consequence. I sent it to Derek with one line attached. This is why the loss stopped at 55,000. His reply came fast. That's unacceptable. I smiled not because he was wrong, but because he still thought the number could have been 0. An hour later, another call came in. This time, it wasn't Derek. It was Marion Klein, Chief Financial Officer, calm voice, precise words. "Valeria," she said, "we're trying to prevent further exposure." Exposure. The word executives use when they realize they're standing on glass. "I understand," I said. "We're reviewing the termination process," she continued. "There may have been haste." I didn't respond. "We'd like to discuss a path forward," Marion said. "Before this escalates." It already had. They just hadn't felt it yet. "I'm open to listening," I said. "But understand this systems remember who respects them. People forget. Machines don't." Another pause. Then a measured breath. "Can you come in tomorrow?" I looked at the darkening sky outside my window. Somewhere across the city, Northwell servers were running hot, confused by instructions that contradicted their own history. "Yes," I said. "Tomorrow." I ended the call and closed the tablet. Derek thought the worst had already happened. He had no idea the expensive part was over. The revealing part was next. Observant viewers will notice something unusual here. "What about you?" I arrived at Northwell Dynamics just before noon the next day. Not early, not late. Timing matters when you want people to notice that you're not rushing anymore. The lobby looked the same: polished floors, muted colors, the kind of corporate calm designed to suggest control. But the energy was wrong. People moved too carefully. Conversations stopped when I passed. Everyone could feel it. The systems were still running, but no one trusted them. Security recognized me instantly. No escort this time. No clipboard. Just a nod and a door held open longer than necessary. The server floor was louder than I remembered. Not in volume pitch. Fans compensating. Cooling systems overworking to manage loads that shouldn't exist. Machines trying to stay ahead of instructions they no longer believed. Derek was waiting near the control room. He looked smaller somehow, his suit less convincing under fluorescent light. He didn't offer his hand. "Thank you for coming," he said, as if courtesy might substitute for accountability. I didn't answer. I walked past him and toward the console. "Before you touch anything," he added quickly, "we need alignment. Corporate wants assurance that this doesn't happen again." I stopped. Slowly. "This didn't happen because of a bug," I said without turning. "It happened because you removed context and replaced it with confidence. That's not fair." He replied, "We followed industry best practices." I faced him then. Best practices are summaries of other people's mistakes. They're not instructions. The room was quiet. Too many people listening. Marion Klein entered behind him, tablet in hand, expression controlled. She watched the screens for a moment before speaking. "Valeria," she said, "we're hemorrhaging soft losses. Nothing dramatic, but enough to erode trust. Clients are asking questions. They should." I replied, "Your systems are confused." She nodded once. "Can you stabilize them?" "Yes," I said. But stability isn't the same as obedience. I took my seat at the console. Muscle memory kicked in immediately. I didn't need dashboards. I listened to the hum, the cadence, the tiny fluctuations no metric ever captured. The machine hadn't forgotten me. "First," I said, typing, "we re-enable local arbitration. Not as a fallback, as a partner." Derek frowned. "That undermines the cloud model. It grounds it." I said, "You've been issuing orders without understanding delays. That's how you get overshoot." I restored the safeguard Derek had blocked. The system responded instantly. Loads redistributing. Temperatures leveling out. The noise softened. Not silent healthy. Someone behind me exhaled without realizing it. Second, I continued. We stop pretending this is a platform problem. It's an authority problem. Derek bristled. Are you saying I'm saying you gave override permissions to people who don't understand consequences? I said calmly. Automation isn't dangerous. Unaccountable automation is. Marion watched the graphs shift from amber back toward green. She didn't smile. How long can you maintain this? She asked. As long as I'm not treated like a temporary patch, I replied. The room understood what that meant. Derek crossed his arms. This sets a precedent. Yes, I said, a better one. I stood and turned to face them both. You want resilience, I asked. Then you don't erase the past. You integrate it. You don't fire the people who built the system and expect the system to forgive you. Marion closed her tablet. We need to talk about your status. I'm listening. She gestured toward the glass conference room. In private, as we walked. I glanced back at the control floor. Technicians were calmer now. The machines had settled into a rhythm they recognized. Trust was returning, slowly, inside the room. Marion didn't waste time. The termination was rushed. She said, We're prepared to discuss reinstatement. With adjustments. Reinstatement isn't enough, I said. Derek scoffed. You're in no position to. Marion raised a hand. He stopped. I'm not interested in a title. I continued. I want authority over system changes, veto power on overrides, and no more optimization initiatives without technical review. Silence. Marion considered. Derek stared at the table. And one more thing. I added, I don't report to Derek. That landed. Marion met my eyes. Who do you report to? The systems? I said. And you, when they speak in numbers. She leaned back. I'll need approval. Of course, I said, but understand this every minute you wait. The machines remember who hesitated. She nodded slowly. Give us the afternoon, she said. I stood. Take your time. As I left the room, Derek didn't follow. He stayed behind, staring at the glass like it might explain how control slipped through his fingers. I returned to the floor and watched the system run. Stable. Calm. Waiting. I didn't leave the building after that meeting. There was no reason to. When systems are unsettled, walking away feels irresponsible, like leaving a patient mid-procedure. Instead, I sat in the observation room above the server floor and let the data speak for itself. Machines don't lie. People do. Sometimes without realizing it. By mid-afternoon, Northwell's dashboards were finally telling the truth. The metrics Derek liked: throughput, latency, utilization had stabilized, but the deeper numbers, the ones executives rarely read unless something goes wrong, were exposing a different story. Error correction cycles had doubled since the automation rollout. Energy consumption had crept upward. Masked by temporary load balancing, fail-safes were firing more often, quietly compensating for instructions that arrived too late or out of order. This wasn't progress. It was debt. Marion Klein joined me just after lunch, carrying 2 coffees. She handed me one without comment and leaned against the railing, watching the floor below. You were right, she said finally. The losses didn't stop at 55,000. They never do, I replied. She exhaled. We've been bleeding in places no one wanted to measure. Productivity looks fine, but maintenance costs are climbing. Client confidence is shaky. I didn't respond. The machines hummed steadily now, but I could hear the strain beneath it. The board wants a clear explanation, Marion continued. They want to know why removing one person caused this much disruption. I looked at her. Because I wasn't one person, I was context. She nodded slowly, as if turning that word over in her mind. They also want accountability, she added. Derek is insisting this was an unforeseeable systems interaction. That's convenient, I said. Marion didn't argue. By late afternoon, the board convened an emergency call. I wasn't invited. That told me everything. They weren't ready to hear from the machines yet. They were still talking to themselves. Derek passed me once in the hallway. He didn't stop, didn't look at me. His confidence had curdled into something defensive, brittle. Men like him don't fear failure, they fear being revealed. At sunset, Marion returned. They're authorizing a revised structure. She said, conditional. I raised an eyebrow. You'll be reinstated as senior systems architect. She continued, with direct reporting to finance and compliance. Override permissions require your sign-off. And Derek, I asked. She hesitated. He'll retain his title, for now. I nodded. That was expected. Organizations move slower than systems. Pride takes longer to unwind. There's more, Marion said. Legal found something during the review. That got my attention. They were auditing your original system contracts, she continued. The custom control logic you wrote years ago. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Not fear, anticipation. There's a clause, she said, buried. It states that the core architecture remains the intellectual property of the creator, licensed to Northwell under continuous employment. I smiled for the first time that day. So when Derek terminated me, I said, the license expired. Yes. Marion replied, technically, the system has been operating without authorization. Technically. I agreed. The room was quiet. What do you want to do? She asked. I don't want to litigate, I said. I want leverage. She nodded. Of course you do. I want that license reinstated permanently. I continued. And I want it written that no future system changes occur without architectural review. Marion considered. That will require board approval. They'll approve, I said calmly, because the alternative is explaining to regulators why critical infrastructure was running on unlicensed code. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. I'll take it to them. As she left, I returned my attention to the floor below. The machines were steady now, running within margins they understood. They weren't fast. They were reliable, that night, as I packed up to go home. My phone buzzed with a final message from Marion. The board approved, effective immediately. I didn't reply. Some victories don't need acknowledgement. They need maintenance. And Derek Holt. He was still in his office when I left. Lights on, door closed, trying to reconcile a world where confidence no longer overruled reality. The machines had spoken. Finally, someone was listening. If you understand the true meaning of this passage, please comment one sentence. The shift didn't happen with an announcement. No email blast, no town hall. Authority rarely changes hands loudly when organizations want to pretend it was always this way. The next morning, my access badge worked again. That small green light at the turnstile told me more than any contract ever could. Systems don't care about titles. They care about permissions. I walked onto the server floor before most of the management team arrived. The machines were already awake, humming at a steady cadence that felt familiar, like hearing an old friend breathe in their sleep. Overnight logs showed clean cycles, fewer corrections, lower thermal spikes, nothing miraculous, just proper alignment restored. Technicians nodded as I passed, not reverently, comfortably. They knew what the numbers didn't show yet. Derek arrived later than usual. I noticed because his footsteps used to announce him fast. Assertive, convinced of their destination. Today. They hesitated. He stopped just inside the floor, scanning for cues, recalibrating a room that no longer oriented around him. Marion followed shortly after. Tablet in hand. We've updated the governance workflow, she said, standing beside me at the console. Override requests route through you now. Good, I replied. That will slow things down. She smiled faintly. Yes, intentionally. Derek cleared his throat behind us. I wasn't aware changes were being implemented without my input. He said. Marion didn't turn. You were informed. I was informed of discussions. He corrected. Not decisions. I saved my work and faced him. Decisions happen when systems are at risk. I said, discussions happen when they aren't. His jaw tightened. You can't seriously believe one person should have veto power over consequences, I asked. Yes, I do. The room was listening now. Derek realized it a moment too late. Marion stepped in smoothly. This isn't personal. Derek, it's containment. Until we're confident, stability isn't dependent on workarounds. Workarounds? The word stung him because he knew how close he'd come to needing them. I built the optimization plan. He said, I own the vision. You owned the risk. I replied, ownership transfers with impact. Silence followed, not tense, not hostile, final. Derek nodded once, stiffly, and walked away. No argument, no exit line, just retreat, by mid-morning. The board's decision was rippling outward. Requests that used to bypass engineering now paused. Emails arrived, asking for clarification instead of demanding compliance. The culture didn't change overnight, but it leaned. That afternoon, I reviewed a proposed update Derek's team had drafted weeks earlier. On paper, it looked efficient. In practice, it would have reintroduced the same blind spots under a different name. I declined it, not harshly, not publicly, just a note explaining the downstream risks and an invitation to revise. An hour later, a revised version arrived. Slower, safer, better. That's how power settles, not by force, but by repetition. Later, Marion joined me again, this time without a tablet. You didn't ask for his role. She said, I didn't want it. I replied, you could have. She added, I don't need to be visible, I said. I need the system to function. She studied me for a moment. You know he's documenting everything. I hope he is. I said, documentation prevents mythology. As the day wound down, I took one last walk along the floor. The machines moved with confidence, again, not the reckless kind, but the earned kind. Operators trusted the signals. Signals trusted the inputs. The loop was whole. At my desk, I opened a new file, not code, notes, lessons, conditions, boundaries. Because this wasn't over. It never is. Organizations forget, slowly, predictably. My job wasn't to win. It was to remember, and make sure the system did too. The audit didn't start with accusations. Those come later, when people are already cornered. This one began quietly, wrapped in the language of prudence and governance. Marion called it a routine compliance review. Derek called it an unnecessary distraction. The systems called it overdue. I was reviewing performance baselines when the first request came in access logs, override histories, authorization trails, not mine, his, Derek's. Compliance teams don't move fast, but they move methodically. Every approval leaves a shadow. Every bypass leaves a fingerprint. And confidence, unchecked, leaves patterns. Marion sat across from me in a small room with glass walls and neutral lighting. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts, timestamps, decision trees, override confirmations. Did you know he authorized emergency bypasses without secondary review? She asked. Yes, I said. I wrote the warnings he ignored. She nodded. He logged them as operational necessities. That's what people say when they don't want to write, I guessed. I replied. The audit widened quickly. What started as a systems review became a governance question. Why were permissions granted so broadly? Why were safeguards labeled optional? Why did financial incentives align with speed but not resilience? None of those questions pointed to me. By midweek, Derek stopped attending meetings. Not officially. He was unavailable, his calendar filled with placeholders and private calls. He passed me once in the corridor, eyes forward, jaw tight, as if proximity itself were dangerous. I didn't chase him. Audits don't need pursuit. They need patience. The machines. Meanwhile, we're thriving. With unnecessary overrides removed. Error rates fell. Energy usage normalized. Maintenance tickets dropped. The data painted a quiet picture of what had always been possible. One afternoon, a junior analyst from compliance approached me hesitantly. Ms. Stone, she said, can I ask you something off the record? I nodded. Why didn't you stop it? she asked. When you saw the risks, when you knew what could happen. I considered the question carefully, because systems that are protected from consequences never learn. I said, and neither do organizations. She wrote that down. The board meeting happened without fanfare. No dramatic vote, just a recalibration of responsibilities. Derek's role was rescoped, his authority narrowed, his incentives adjusted. The word demotion was never used, but titles don't matter when access disappears. That evening, Marion called me. It's done, she said. I didn't ask what it was. I already knew. They're offering him a transition package. She added. Quiet, respectful, good. I said. He doesn't need to be punished. She paused. You don't sound angry. I'm not. I replied. Anger is for surprises. This was math. The next day, Derek's office was empty, his nameplate removed, his presence reduced to a few forwarded emails and an auto-reply that spoke in future tense. The system barely noticed. I spent the afternoon documenting everything, what failed, why it failed, and what would prevent it from happening again. Not for blame, for memory. As I finished, I caught my reflection in the darkened glass. Older than when this started. Calmer, too. Power had shifted. Not because I demanded it, but because the numbers demanded someone accountable to them. That's the difference people miss. You don't win against arrogance by shouting. You let it measure itself. When I shut down my console that night, the systems were stable, quiet, and honest. They didn't need me to watch them anymore, but they knew I could. And that was enough. The week after Derek disappeared was the calmest Northwell had felt in months. Not because nothing was happening, but because nothing was being forced. Systems ran at a pace that matched reality. Meetings shortened. Emails lost their urgency tags. People stopped apologizing for asking questions. That kind of calm unnerves executives more than chaos. Chaos can be blamed. Calm exposes patterns. Marion asked me to sit in on a budget review, not as a presenter, as a translator. The finance team projected charts onto the wall: maintenance costs, energy consumption, overtime hours. The numbers told a story no one wanted to read out loud. Every efficiency gain from the rushed automation had been offset by hidden costs, increased support load, vendor escalations, penalty clauses triggered by minor delays. Stability is expensive. One executive muttered. No, I said quietly. Instability is. You just weren't measuring it. The room shifted. I explained how systems under stress consume resources invisibly, how micro-corrections add up, how human intervention increases when trust in automation drops, how fear creates redundancy that no dashboard tracks. These weren't theories. They were already in the numbers. By the end of the meeting, no one argued. They didn't need to. The data had done the work. Later that day, a message arrived from legal, short, formal. The permanent license agreement was finalized. My name sat on the document not as an employee, but as an authority. That distinction mattered. I signed it without ceremony and returned to the floor. The machines responded the same way they always had, by doing exactly what they were told. No more. No less. Respect is efficient. That afternoon, Marion joined me again, leaning against the railing as we watched a maintenance cycle complete flawlessly. They're asking about succession planning, she said. I smiled. Already they don't want another single point of failure. She explained. Good. I said, neither do I. We discussed mentorship, documentation, redundancy built on understanding, not replacement, the difference between sharing knowledge and stripping it for parts. There's something else, Marion added. The board wants you to present next quarter. I frowned. Present what? The story, she said. What happened, why it happened, what it cost. I considered it. They won't like it. They don't have to, she replied. They just need to remember it. That night, as I packed up, I received a message from an unfamiliar address, short, direct. You didn't have to let it go that far. I knew who it was from. I didn't. I typed back. You did. There was no reply. The following days settled into a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Work became precise again. Decisions slowed just enough to be thoughtful. People stopped chasing optimization and started asking why things worked in the first place. One afternoon, a junior engineer approached me with a question not about code, but about judgment. How do you know when to intervene? He asked. I thought for a moment. When the system stops trusting itself, I said, that's when you step in. He nodded, as if filing it away for later. As the quarter closed, Northwell's reports looked unremarkable. That was the victory. No spikes, no headlines, no emergencies disguised as innovation. The board approved a revised governance framework quietly. No press release, no announcement, just a shift in how decisions were made. Derek Holt's name appeared once more on a consulting firm's website. New title, same language, different logo. I wished him well. Truly. Because the lesson wasn't about him. It was about what happens when people confuse speed with mastery and forget that systems don't care who you are. They only respond to what you understand. As I shut down the console that evening, the floor lights dimmed automatically, machines entering their rest cycle with a confidence that felt earned. Stability, I realized, isn't the absence of change, it's the presence of memory. And this time, Northwell remembered. By the time the next quarter closed, Northwell Dynamics looked unremarkable from the outside. No headlines, no emergency meetings, no late-night calls disguised as strategic check-ins for executives who measured success by excitement. That was unsettling. For systems and the people who worked beside them, it was a relief. The board presentation took place on a Thursday afternoon. I stood at the end of the table, not at the head. That was deliberate. Authority that needs a spotlight usually isn't stable yet. I didn't begin with the failure. I began with the pattern. I showed them what happened when decision-making outran understanding, how small delays compounded into real costs, how safeguards labeled legacy quietly prevented disasters no one ever saw. I didn't name Derek. I didn't need to. The numbers already had. Then I showed them the return, not profit, not growth, discipline, lower variance in performance, reduced intervention hours, fewer emergency approvals, energy consumption trending toward baseline, maintenance schedules returning to predictability. These weren't flashy wins, they were foundations. This is what resilience looks like. I said, it doesn't feel fast, it feels boring, and that's the point. No one interrupted. When I finished, the room stayed quiet longer than usual, not because they disagreed, but because they were recalibrating. That kind of silence is rare in corporate spaces. It means something landed. Afterward, Marian walked with me back toward the floor. They didn't argue. She said, they couldn't. I replied, the system already answered their questions. She nodded. They want you to formalize the framework. Make it policy. Policies age. I said, principles last. Then we'll codify the principles. She replied, with teeth. That was new and promising. Over the next few weeks, something subtle happened. Requests came in earlier. Decisions slowed just enough to be informed. People stopped using the word optimize like a spell and started using it like a responsibility. I spent time with the engineering teams, not training, just listening, asking what broke when no one was watching, what they didn't trust yet. Systems don't regain confidence all at once. Neither do people. One afternoon, I found myself back at the console alone, reviewing a long-term forecast. The machines were steady, calm, predictable. That's when I realized something else had changed. So had I. I wasn't bracing anymore, not waiting for the next push to prove myself again. The leverage wasn't emotional, it was structural, built into how decisions were made now. That's the difference between winning an argument and changing a system. A message arrived late that day from Marian. Again, the board approved the mentorship track. I smiled. It wasn't about replacing me. It was about ensuring no one else would ever have to carry the system alone again. shared understanding, documented judgment, redundancy built on respect. That night, as I packed up, I passed the old conference room where it started. The glass still held faint smudges from past meetings. I paused there longer than I expected. Not out of nostalgia, out of recognition. Systems don't punish arrogance. They price it, quietly, precisely, and when someone finally pays attention, the invoice has already been delivered. I walked out into the evening air and felt lighter than I had in years, not because the fight was over, but because the work finally matched the truth of it. Northwell wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it had learned something rare. Discipline isn't the enemy of progress. It's the only thing that makes progress survivable. Tomorrow, I'd return to the floor, review logs, listen to the hum, teach a little, learn a little. The system would keep running, so would I. And that was enough. The strangest part wasn't that things worked again. It was how quickly everyone adjusted to the new normal, as if calm had always been the plan. A month after the audit, Northwell felt quieter in ways no memo could mandate. Not less busy, just less frantic. Meetings ended with decisions instead of deferrals. Engineers stopped bracing before deployments. Operators trusted the indicators again, not because they were told to, but because the systems had earned it back. That's how trust actually returns. Not through speeches, through repetition. I spent more time mentoring than troubleshooting. Not because nothing broke, but because when something drifted, someone else noticed it first. That was the real return on discipline awareness, distributed instead of hoarded. One afternoon, I sat with a small group of junior engineers in the break room, the one that used to be Derek's office before facilities quietly repurposed it. The coffee was better now, stronger, less apologetic. They asked thoughtful questions, not about tools, but about judgment. How do you know when a system is lying to you? One of them asked. I thought about that. Systems don't lie. I said. They reveal what they're optimized for. If the output surprises you, it means you misunderstood the incentive. They wrote that down. Another asked, what if leadership pushes back again? They will. I replied, eventually, pressure always returns. That's why you build friction into the process, not to stop progress, but to slow bad ideas down long enough to examine them. They nodded. Some smiled. They'd felt the pressure already. Now they had language for it. Later that week, Marion invited me to lunch. No agenda, no documents. Do you ever think about leaving? She asked, stirring her tea. I considered the question honestly. Sometimes, I said, not because I'm unhappy, because systems like this can survive without me now. She smiled. That's a compliment. It's also the point. I replied. She leaned back. The board asked what happens when you do, and I told them the truth. She said, that, if we've done this right, they won't notice immediately. I laughed softly. Good answer. The next day, I received a calendar invite I hadn't expected. Derek Holt, former director of operational optimization. The subject line read simply, coffee. I stared at it longer than necessary. Curiosity won. We met at a quiet place halfway between the office and the city. He looked different, not defeated, adjusted. The sharp edges of certainty sanded down by consequence. I won't take much of your time, he said. You already did. I replied gently, but go on. He smiled faintly. Fair, I wanted to say. I didn't understand what you protected. He said, I thought removing dependency was leadership. And now, I asked, I think leadership is knowing which dependencies you can't afford to break. That was closer than I expected. I'm consulting now, he added. Different industry, smaller systems? Good. I said, start small. He nodded. I won't make the same mistake again. Everyone says that. I replied. The difference is whether you remember it when the numbers start flattering you. He accepted that. We finished our coffee. No apology was offered. None was needed. Back at Northwell, the systems continued their steady work. The mentorship track launched quietly. Documentation grew thicker, not bloated, but intentional. Context recorded alongside code. Decisions logged with reasoning. Not just approval stamps. One evening, as I prepared to leave, I stood alone on the floor and listened. Not for errors, for tone. The machines sounded, settled, not strained, not eager, just present. That's the sound you hope for when no one's watching. As I shut down the console, a junior engineer waved from across the room. Confident, focused, unafraid to ask for review before pushing changes. I waved back. Legacy isn't about age, it's about what remains when the noise fades. And for the first time in a long while, what remained felt solid. The decision didn't arrive with drama. No final meeting, no emotional speech. Just a quiet certainty that settled in one morning while I stood alone on the floor before the shift change. The machines were warming up, lights blinking through their familiar sequence. The sound was right balanced, patient, unhurried. That sound used to tell me where I was needed. This time, it told me something else. They didn't need me anymore, not in the way they once had. I walked the perimeter slowly, fingers trailing along guardrails polished smooth by decades of hands. Each station responded exactly as expected. No hesitation, no correction spirals, no hidden strain under the surface. The system trusted itself. That's the moment you don't plan for as an architect. Everyone imagines the end as exhaustion or conflict, or being pushed out again. No one talks about the moment when staying would mean taking up space someone else is ready to fill. At my desk, I opened the console one last time, not to fix anything, just to observe. Uptime was clean, error margins minimal, overrides rare and justified. Notes from the mentorship team scrolled by. Thoughtful and precise. Good questions, better answers. Marian arrived later that morning. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, watching the same screens. You hear it too, don't you? She asked quietly. Yes. I said, they're ready. She nodded. I thought you might say that. We didn't discuss timelines. We didn't need to. Some conversations only require acknowledgement. By noon, the paperwork was done, not a resignation, an evolution, advisory status, no daily presence, no authority vacuum, just a slow transfer of attention from me to the structure we'd built together. I walked through the building one last time, saying goodbye without announcing it. A nod here, a smile there, no speeches, no promises, just continuity. In the break room, the one that used to be Derek's office, the junior engineers were mid-discussion, arguing gently over a design trade-off. They noticed me, paused, then kept going. That made me smile more than any applause ever could. I stepped outside into the afternoon light and took a long breath. The building behind me didn't feel like something I was leaving. It felt like something I'd finished. At home that evening, I sat by the window again, watching the street as I had on the day it all began. This time, my tablet stayed off. No alerts, no diagnostics, nothing calling me back. The silence was earned. A message arrived just before sunset from Marian. The system ran flawlessly today. No overrides, no incidents. I replied with a single word. Good. Later. As the sky darkened, I thought about Derek Holt, not with resentment, but clarity. He wasn't a villain. He was a symptom. Confidence outrunning understanding. Speed mistaken for mastery. A story as old as systems themselves. Northwell would face it again someday. Every organization does. But next time, the friction would be built in, the memory encoded, the questions asked before the switches were thrown. That's the difference. When I look back on what really mattered in this story, it wasn't the money lost or the titles reshuffled. It was the moment I realized I didn't need to fight to be seen anymore. I was standing inside a system I helped build, feeling its weight hum beneath my feet, and understanding that experience isn't loud. It doesn't beg, it waits. The lesson was simple and hard. At the same time, real value shows itself when pressure arrives, not when applause does. Emotionally, this story is about dignity, about staying steady when someone tries to erase you with a word like obsolete. Humanly, it's about choosing patience over pride, and responsibility over revenge. I wasn't trying to win, I was trying to protect something that mattered, including myself. If you're still here listening, are you staying until the very end with me? And have you ever had a moment at work or in life where you knew your worth long before anyone else admitted it? I'd genuinely love to hear your story. Where are you listening from right now if this story resonated with you? Feel free to leave a comment, tap like, or share it with someone who might need it. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're always welcome to subscribe and stay with me.